Welcome to part 3 of our election year survival guide. So far, we have talked about the most common reasons people are reluctant to engage in what's happening in the culture during an election year. And then we've also talked about the gospel-centered purpose and need for cultural engagement and confronting the cultural lies. And here in part 3, we are going to talk about 9 specific election year discipleship opportunities that present themselves during an election year. How do we take the challenges and difficulties and issues that arise during an election year and use them as leverage for our discipleship goals, which is really the Great Commission, of course, and everything that we're supposed to be about for a church. So we're going to talk through specifically some topics that we could tackle and how we might be able to tackle them. Of course, I don't have the time to do them in the kind of depth that you would do in a sermon or a series, but might prompt some thinking and see some opportunities for that. So the first one that we're going to cover here, first of 9, is how to have hard conversations. And this is, of course, a really valuable life skill. It's a valuable skill for the church to have. And frankly, I think one of the unintended consequences of just kind of neglecting the hardest conversations that happen in our culture inside the church is that people don't see demonstrations of how it can be done. The reality is we're surrounded by conflict in our marriages, in our work environment, certainly online and in the kind of political discourse that happens, and we often see it done poorly. And part of the reason we see it being done poorly is because people don't see models of how to do it well very often, and I hope that the church can become a place where that happens. So some tips on how to talk about doing it right, having hard conversations in ways that honors the Lord. The first way to do that is to get your heart right. A lot of people get engaged in hard conversations with a lot of passion, and they are excited and energized in not necessarily the right way, so it leads to a non-constructive conversation. Luke 6:45, the good man out of the good treasures of his heart brings forth what is good. The evil man out of the evil treasures brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart. And what's the lesson here, of course, is that if you know you're going to have a hard conversation, if you need to, you have to make sure that you are thinking about the person on the other side of the conversation in a way that honors Jesus. If your heart is holding bitterness and resentment, that is inevitably going to reveal itself, and that is going to make the conversation more difficult than it needs to. Same theme here, Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for out of it flows the springs of life. Constantly check your thoughts, attitudes, and motives. And if we cannot have the thoughts, the mind of Christ toward people that we will be talking to, we should probably refrain from initiating that conversation until we can, because the probability that it's going to be constructive is quite small. The second way to have constructive, difficult conversations is listen first. Now, lots of biblical wisdom about why we need to listen. Of course, James tells us in the first chapter of James, everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak. And we hear it say that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And I think that might be true. But our flesh wants to speak quickly. And social media, frankly, commands it as like a best practice. But God wants us to listen first and then speak later. Lots of reasons why that's wisdom, because we're gathering all the facts, but it also prevents us from having to apologize for rushing to judgment. In addition, one of my favorite proverbs when it comes to kind of interpersonal relationships and interactions is Proverbs 16:21, which says, "The wise in heart will be called understanding, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness." The first part of that, the wise in heart will be called understanding. Why is that so helpful for conversations? Is that an understanding person, the only way you would be called an understanding person is if you took enough time to listen, that the person you're engaging with perceives you to be genuinely interested in what they have to say, so they think that you're an understanding person. The only way that can be done is by actively listening. The person who just rushes to judgment, rushes right into their lectures and their, their opinions, is not a person that most of us would look at and say, oh, you're an understanding person. So the wise in heart will be called understanding. That's a symptom of wisdom. The listening enough to be called understanding is a sign of wisdom. But the second part of that proverb is also important, where it says, "In sweetness, of speech increases persuasiveness." So it's also a tactic when it comes to talking to somebody, is being understanding, because the sweetness of speech and the way we respond and interact with them makes it much more likely that they're going to listen to us anyway, which makes the whole purpose of that conversation more fruitful. Proverbs 15:1 in a similar line, and we're all familiar with this, is a soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh answer stirs up judgment. If we have the ability to respond not defensively, but kindly and gently and rationally, we're much more likely to have a positive interaction. So again, we know this intellectually. Seeing that demonstrated is also really helpful in seeing how that works, which is one reason why it's a great idea to set up these conversations and model them. And the third point, we've talked about getting your heart right and and then listening first. And the third point in how to have hard conversations well is get your facts right. And this is Proverbs 18:13 provides some wisdom on this. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is shame and folly to him. Now, certainly in discussion of political issues and political developments, we are really likely in our modern context to rush to judgment, which means somebody hears about something on the internet and they assume that it is true because it is from a source that they're inclined to agree with. So they just immediately develop very strong opinions about it. We see this happen with space wars or vaccines or whatever the issue of the day is. Half of the internet is an expert in the issue within like 48 hours of it even becoming a story. We didn't know anything. We'd never even heard the term, but now we're all experts in that, right? Because we are so quick to rush to judgment. But the wisdom there that we see in Proverbs is, if you answer a matter before you hear it, it's shame and folly to you. It is folly to form an opinion about something without hearing all sides of the matter. So when somebody brings a complaint, when somebody expresses a strong opinion about something, we can say, oh, that's interesting, thank you for sharing. But it is folly if we just say, oh, because you said it, because you're outraged, I'm going to mirror your outrage, I'm going to share your opinion just because you obviously care a lot. That is an act of folly, because, as is very often the case in life, as soon as we hear the other side, our perspective can change rather quickly. In addition to that, Proverbs 6:16 through 19, and this is the list of 6 things that the Lord hates. I won't read all of them, but the last one is one who spreads strife among brothers. That's one thing that God hates, is someone who spreads strife among brothers. Now, what does that mean? It's somebody who goes about trying to create conflict, trying to gossip, misrepresent situations because they want to, create some kind of problem for somebody they've chosen to dislike. In a political context, this is often referred to as negative campaigning, because we know that so many of our political advertisements omit relevant information for the purpose of creating a misperception. Perhaps the facts they share are mostly true or even entirely true, but they're delivered in a context where they intentionally create a misimpression that the communicator understands would not exist if all the facts were presented. That's what we mean in that context by sowing strife among brothers. It's something God hates. It's something that the church must certainly reject, but it's also part of the reason why getting our facts right is so important before rushing to judgment, because we know that that's happening, but we also must make sure that we are never part of that. We have to have the sobriety and the maturity to make sure that we are interested mostly in what is true, not necessarily how that affects what the outcome of knowing the facts are, because sometimes facts are inconvenient. But that doesn't mean that we should be afraid of the facts, because we love truth most of all. And so, if we had a church that was really good at doing these things, at first checking our heart to make sure we have the mind of Christ before we talk to somebody about something that we know is going to be hard, that we can want good things for them. And then second, if we commit ourselves to listening before we express strong opinions so that we can be the wise in heart person who is called understanding. And then third, if we're really committed to understanding the facts, if we're really committed to the truth of the matter, not just our perception of the matter or not just what somebody told us about the matter, if our heart's desire is to understand the facts as they actually are so that we can respond in a just, appropriate way. If those things are in order, whether it's a conversation about some political issue or a political party or, a marriage issue or, some debating the color of the carpet in the church or whatever it is that we're arguing about, right? If we do those things well, those hard conversations will become much less difficult. And you can find out that we find out that it's possible to really build each other up and edify each other, even in the midst of these difficult conversations. And that should be the goal, of course.